Justin, we're about a quarter of the way through the NHL season, and I thought it was just a good time to assess where the Maple Leafs are currently at and match up what they're doing, I think, relative to what I thought their preseason
Mhm.
expectations were. I mean, the list is short, but the goals are big ones, right? Challenge for a division title, solidify yourself as a true Stanley Cup contender. 19 games in, I think we can almost cross off winning the Atlantic with the Bruins just running away with it
Think
after
so, yeah.
everyone thought they were going to fall off. But would you consider Toronto to be a true cup contender with what you've seen so far?
I don't think I consider them a true cup contender to begin with from the start of the year, right? We looked, and again, when you look at this team and how it was again, talking about how this team was built, just that defense core and that goaltending to me are two glaring, huge issues that are not going to go away anytime soon, right? It's clear as day that they're not going to go away unless a move is made or something is done by Brad to change it up, which we talked about ad nauseum last week. Um, to me, when I look at a true Stanley Cup contender, it's a team that can go into any building on any particular night and win, right? And we're gonna see that kind of this week in a big week for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They play the Florida Panthers and the Boston Bruins, two teams who are they're looking up at in the Atlantic Division. They also are playing a Seattle Kraken team that's been underachieving so far this year. I think we both can agree that the Kraken aren't what we thought they'd be after their last season's postseason success. When
Mm.
I look at the Leafs right now, yes, they went to Sweden. Yes, they came back on the road, and this weekend was not very good for them. The overtime loss to Chicago, and they just didn't really put forth a very good effort in Pittsburgh against Kyle Dubas and the Penguins. Um, this is a team that I don't know whether it's they feel that they can just flip the switch and play whenever they want to, and they know that they're talented enough as a regular season team to just get there, and their talent will carry them to another 100-point season, 50 plus wins like they've got the last 2 years. It's different now. But when you look at the Eastern Conference standings, there's a whole lot of parity. The last place team in the Columbus Blue Jackets are only 7 points below the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Ottawa Senators are second last in the Eastern Conference, but they've only played 16 games,
Mm.
right? They have a lot of games in hand. So what I'm trying to say is this Eastern Conference is nothing to take easy or take lightly. If I'm the Toronto Maple Leafs, every game is going to be a meaningful game. There are games, especially against Eastern Conference opponents, where it's going to matter when it comes down to the end of the season, right? That's why getting off to a hot start in the beginning of the year is so critical to me because you're not playing catch up, right? You're not playing, behind the eight ball, and there you have points banked for later on in case injuries show up or like as the Leafs no defensive issues or goaltending woes or whatever, right? So when I look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, are they a true Stanley Cup contender? Talent wise, up front, yes. But in my mind, in my criteria, no. I don't believe they are true Stanley Cup contenders because the issues that they have are not going to help them win on a night in, night out basis in certain areas and situations as the season progresses that are going to be very difficult and high pressure situations.
Yeah, I look at them kind of the same. I think same as last year. They're still paying
Mhm.
four guys way too much money. They might have to pay the fourth guy even more, and then they have a decision to make because William Nylander isn't making it easier for Brad Treliving. Whatever the
No.
Leafs wanted to pay Willie, that's gone now. That
Yeah.
number's gone up because of what he's done so far this season. But if you look back on last year, through the same amount of games, they're just a point off that pace.
Mhm.
They've scored more, but the biggest issue is they've allowed more, 15 more goals against than they did last season at this time. They've lost more games in regulation, than they've won this season. I think maybe played two complete games, Justin. I would say the one against Vancouver and maybe the one in Dallas as well. But
Yeah.
it's a lot of the same issues, right? You have your top six who are carrying the scoring load more or less. I mean, the top line hasn't been great as of late, but honestly, I'm not worried about Marner and Matthews in the regular season. Those guys will be
Mhm.
fine. They'll go through some stretches, I think, where they struggle, but Keefe will adjust the lines accordingly, and I think guys will bounce back. But you look at the bottom six, and overall, they've kind of been ineffective. Max Domi, who came in this year, is supposed to bring some snot and some offense. He's got no goals. Sure, he's got 11 assists, but no goals. I mean, Keefe went 11-7 the other night, and I think that tells you a lot about how he feels about that bottom six. Then the defense again is just it's not good enough, right? Giving up almost
Mhm.
4 goals a game, which is like the bottom third in the NHL, chopping and changing the bottom. I mean, losing Klingberg, a guy that Treliving brought in, paying him 4+ million now on LTIR. Looks like he may never play for the Toronto Maple Leafs again. We talked about that already, so I don't want to get into that too much, but that's a massive issue. And they still, after all these years, Justin, still don't have a number one goalie. I
No.
understand they're going with a tandem, but this tandem is below average. There's still no clear number one. Samsonov clearly has confidence issues. He lets in bad goals. Joseph Wall, um, I think he's decent. Can he be your number one right now from what I've seen? Probably not. So I can't put them in the pool of true Stanley Cup contenders. I mean, I really thought they were going to push for an Atlantic Division title. I really thought that. But that was me thinking, okay, Leafs are going to bounce back. They might get stronger in the back end, which I think they will moving forward. And obviously the expectation for Boston was they're going to drop off after,
Mhm.
losing embarrassingly in the first round to the Panthers, losing some key guys. That didn't happen. They look like they're even better. Florida came into the season banged up. Doesn't matter. They're still playing really well. Tampa up against the cap, guys who've played, I mean, too many games, right? With the Tampa Bay Lightning, they look fine, and they're still missing Vasilevsky. When he comes back, they're gonna get even better. So, I mean, the Leafs aren't in a great position to win the division. I would knock that off completely. But the question about them being a true Cup contender, I really can't put them in that category. I mean, just watch Boston, watch the Rangers, watch LA, watch Vegas,
Mhm.
and the Leafs don't even compare to those teams.
Look, when you look at the goals the Leafs are scoring, they're scoring 3.4 goals per game. They're allowing 3.4 goals per game,
Too
right?
much.
Exactly. You look at their offensive stats, again, as we expected, in the top half of the league, top 10 in most categories, right? In the defensive side, the bottom half, 22nd in goals allowed, 22nd in shots allowed, penalty kills 18th, penalty minutes is 18th. So, they're when I look at the Leafs, right, and I look at what they put forth, again, this is again the doing of the roster construction, but also I don't know. There's no excuse that we mentioned with the Tampa Bay Lightning, but these guys playing too many games and being
Mhm.
fatigued. But on certain nights, I believe that their best players have not shown. We've seen a lot of off games. We haven't seen. You mentioned the game against the Canucks, right? As some of their complete games, but even then, was that really a complete game hour? Because Marner and Matthews in that game were pretty much disappeared. We didn't notice them. I have yet to see a complete game of the Toronto Maple Leafs where from first line to fourth line, first pair to third pair, and starting goalie that everything clicked. I haven't seen that yet, right? And when I look at teams like Tampa Bay, I look at teams like Boston, I look at teams like Florida, all the teams you mentioned, there's at least a certain sample size of games where we've seen their top gear. Now, that could be a good thing for the Toronto Maple Leafs that we haven't seen their top gear yet this season. But a quarter way into it, you would think that the Leafs, would play their best game. Now, again, to equate to the NFL, the Philadelphia Eagles have the best record in football and haven't played a complete game at all. I know it's different sports and stuff like that, but when I look at the Leafs and I look at the issues that they have, it's not an issue that can just be mopped up or cleaned up. It's something that's going to have to require not major surgery, but you're going to have to go in and operate on this team a little bit if you're Brad Living. So you're going to have to move potentially a forward piece or a something like your prospect pool to improve that defense core, right? We've talked about that. Are you going to be a buyer at the deadline for a depth goalie just in case, right? You mentioned, can you trust Samsonov in a 7-game series? Do you want to have further insurance for Joseph Wall in a playoff series, right? These are all questions that need to be answered. And when I look at Stanley Cup contenders, when there's a lot less questions, and sorry, there's more answers than questions, right? And with the Leafs, I feel like we have a lot more questions than answers. And that is the biggest reason why, again, they're not gonna be able to break that barrier of getting past the first 2 rounds and really getting into the final four and those really truly deep playoff runs is because there's just too many questions about this roster construction. Look, we got Mitch Marner and William Nylander are now flipping positions apparently in the lineup.
Well, that
So
hasn't happened yet. It's been
officially,
suggested.
but there's been reports that it
Yeah,
might happen through practice. But
right.
that to me again is questions are just every day there's a new question, new concern about the Toronto Maple Leafs. Right now, it's the defense and also Mitch Marner because he hasn't looked like Mitch Marner of late.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the same questions, right? The Marner thing is interesting. He's still getting his points, even though he's not playing well. But what do we know
Mhm.
about Marner? He's a really good regular season player. Put him in the playoffs with no space, and he can't do the same type of damage. I will say this to end this on a positive note, a semi positive note. They're not in a terrible position in terms of how they've played relative to their record because they can clearly play better. And I think you alluded to that. But yes, I mean, you compare him to some of the top teams in the league when you're looking at contenders, and I don't think they're close. I really don't. And bringing in, let's say, a Patrick Kane or something like that's not really going to help. I think moving forward, I want to see what Tree Living's going to do with this Klingberg cap space. If Klingberg is actually not going to play anymore, if he's done, which I think he is, he just hasn't really announced it yet. The Leafs haven't said anything. They're going to let this LTIR stint run out, and then whatever happens, happens. I'm going to assume they're going to use that money to get a defenseman, maybe make a trade, because if they don't do that, then it's just going to be another wasted season for the Toronto Maple Leafs, unfortunately.